if you could, I'd just let you introduce. I think that self introductions are so much better and stuff. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little about yourself.
Yes, well, my name is Kathe Hambrick. I am currently the new executive director of the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University, which happens to be the world's largest repository for Black history in the world. I am the founder of the River Road African American Museum, which is located in Donaldsonville, which will be celebrating its 30th year anniversary next year in 2024. I am the former executive director, curator, exhibit designer, PR marketing person for the River Road African American Museum. And because of the work with the museum there in Donaldsonville and Ascension Parish, as a result of that and former work that I did as a curator with the West Baton Rouge Museum, I decided to start my own consulting firm. And that consulting firm is called To Preserve Consulting LLC, but it's pretty much on hold now because I am looking forward to this next part of my preservation journey, which involves the preservation of documents, manuscripts, books, and art at the Amistad.
Great, great. How did the Amistad get its start? I mean, it's been and the collection. How did it come together? If you could tell a little more about that and kind of what are there areas of focus there with the archive and just as let you take it from there.
Yeah, so the Amistad actually got its name from the Amistad Liberation Ship. I don't like to refer to it as a slave ship,
Sure.
but it was a ship that had 53 Africans sailing from Cuba, and they had a mutiny on the ship, took over the ship in 1839, and then ended up being captured and brought back into the States where the Amistad legal case, abolition case took place in New York City. The AMA, the American Missionary Association, provided the attorneys, which for anyone who's ever seen the movie Amistad, you see the whole case, the whole case acted out. A Supreme Court case which set the Africans free and said they could not be enslaved or re-enslaved, and they were given their freedom. So because of the AMA's involvement in that case, eventually the documents from the case, the original documents from the court case, the manifest from the ship, is now housed here as a part of the Amistad Research Center's collection, thus where we get the name Amistad. Then the United Church of Homeland Ministries came in and started to assist. I'm going to turn because I'm looking at my calendar on the wall. By 1966, the American Church Board of Homeland Ministries took over the records that ended up at Fisk University archives. The AMA records ended up at Fisk University. Both the United Church of Homeland Ministries and the AME were big in the abolitionist movement before the Civil War. So we hold AMA records as well as the United Church records. Fisk University then ended up turning over the Amistad collection to Dillard University. And that happened in 1969. Then the collection ended up coming to Tulane in 1987. We are in the original library of Tulane University, Tilton Hall, and it was also the location of the Tulane Law Library, which was a perfect location for archives at that time because the building architecturally is built to hold the stacks, library stacks, heavy shelving. Um, it's a really, really interesting building architecturally because it has glass floors, 3 stories of glass floors, because the building was built before electricity, and it was believed that the natural sunlight could actually provide the lighting for the librarians and archivists who were going in and out of the stacks. So it's a historic building. I've learned over my career, it's not always ideal to try to have a museum, or for that matter, may not be the ideal place for archives, the oldest buildings in your city, particularly when you're in a humid climate and a hurricane zone, flood zone, as we are in South Louisiana. But Tilton, this building on Tulane's campus has survived many storms and many floods. And so it's the best place for us to be right now.
That's great. That's great. And that's another thing is that you're starting to, or may not be starting, but you're telling the story of the Underground Railroad and its place here in Louisiana as well. I think that so many people think that that's just something that's further closer to the Mason-Dixon line and up north, that this is a way, but it reaches all the way down here to the Gulf as well.
Yes, and my experience with learning about the Underground Railroad beyond what we typically learned in school. I mean, when you ask the average American, tell me something you know about the Underground Railroad, well, the first thing most people are going to say is Harriet Tubman. That's the one person we know affiliated with the Underground Railroad. And then the next fact that we typically learn is that she took enslaved people from the South to Canada. So we know the Canadian connection. But I had an opportunity to go to a workshop and then a series of conferences over the years in the early 90s and throughout the 2000s that the National Park Service was having. And the program was called the Network for Freedom program. And so it was National Park Service, historians, interpreters, people from the National Trust who own houses and homes and places that had stories that documented the Underground Railroad. And what the Park Service challenged us to do as historians was to look at the Underground Railroad as an international movement, really, and to look at it from the perspective that, sorry, plugging my phone in, look at it from the perspective also that freedom came to people from all directions. So, for instance, up in Ascension Parish, where I am located, right on the Mississippi River, where my museum is located in Donaldsonville, we knew that the river was a water route for escape. So, unlike Harriet Tubman, who might have taken a majority land route, walking, there were people in Louisiana stowing away on ships, riverboats, hiding on those riverboats, paying off with whatever money they had taken, paying off riverboat captains, finding riverboat captains who had a sensitivity or against slavery, who would stow them away and help them make their way north. So we started to look at those narratives, those slave narratives, and those documents of those riverboat captains, and looking at the Underground Railroad as a multi-directional escape
I know. I just spoke with a
stories,
yeah.
not just from the south to the north. Also, what we found that people were going from the River Road, say Ascension St. James Parish, as we know in the case of the 1811 slave revolt, that they were making their way farther south. Free people of color buying and purchasing their enslaved relatives to eventually set them free. They would purchase them, hold them in a state of indentureship for 7 years, teach them a trade, then give them their freedom. Then families started to move and migrate, both enslaved and free, from the river parishes down into New Orleans, where they could more than likely hide among the thousands of other free people of color and less likely be captured and taken back into slavery. So the exhibit that I developed at the River Road African American Museum over the years has looked at that story, South Louisiana's journey on the Underground Railroad. And we actually had a curriculum guide that we used at several of our summer camps, all around those narratives, maps, and stories.
That's amazing. I just spoke with a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine in Galveston, this past weekend, and she was talking about the fact they have some documented stories of about a dozen enslaved individuals who actually escaped to Mexico, and so they're looking at
Mhm.
that as well. So it wasn't just north of Canada; it was south, it was other places as well. But again, the blending in New Orleans, where it was a safe haven to some extent, is really
Yes.
amazing. So
Yes, and that place you're talking about below Galveston is called Nacimiento, I believe.
okay,
Nacimiento, Mexico. And when I first opened the museum at Texcoco Plantation back in 1994, there was a group of people traveling from Nacimiento to Baton Rouge. Um, it was with a church group. And somehow they read about our museum at Texcoco and they walked in and they were all Black people, Black people, Afro Mexicans,
hmm
and they didn't speak any English. They had two Americans who spoke English who translated. And they walked into the museum and they saw a picture, a photo of Pompey Factor that I had on the wall, who was a part of the runaways from the Seminole Indian Nation of Florida, who ended up settling in Nacimiento. And I'll tell you, that was an exciting day for me because what they were trying to tell me as they pointed at his picture on my wall at the museum was that was their great great grandfather.
wow.
And
Kind of get
so,
chills hearing that. Is that again how these paths cross and how these stories are interwoven.
it's not just a part, it's a part of American history, but it's a part of world history. It's a part of world history. I mean, when you think about daily what we hear into America, and then now here's a story which said that talks about the fact that there were enslaved people who were trying to cross the border to get into Mexico, and they were actually successful in going there and building a township that's known as Nacimiento.
Wow, amazing. Well, in your master's degree from 2012, you're from Slidell. Your parents are from Slidell, and in 2012, you received your museum studies degree, master's degree from it is from Southern University in New Orleans. And so, just
Yes.
telling those stories is such a skill, but also it's being a good editor as well, not just researcher, but also editor, and making sure that you're keeping people's attention and stuff. And you've done so many exhibits over the years, and consulting with those. What are you seeing as some of the I guess how are the resources different or the same, that are out there for telling those stories and doing that kind of research into um, African American, Afro Mexican, background? I mean, what are your main sources? I guess is what I'm trying to stammer to say. So,
Well, there's some irony in the fact that I ended up um, being here at the Amistad Research Center. When I first started the museum, I had no knowledge of that there was even a word or a field, career in museology, the science of museum studies. And because of my love of Black history, and I also worked for IBM for 12 years before moving back to Louisiana. I knew a little bit about technology from the sense that I knew there was something coming to the world called domain names, and there was something that was going to be introduced to the world that was going to be called the World Wide Web. So I worked for IBM in the 80s in California, and I happened to work for their telecommunications division. So when I got the bright idea from the Rural Life Museum in Baton Rouge, actually, when I went to the Rural Life Museum and I saw the slave cabins that they had there, and I saw the artifacts that they had on exhibit there, and I just felt that there must be a better way to tell those stories. And so, mind you, this was back in the early 90s. And so I met Mr. Dutton, who was there at the Real Life Museum, and he actually became a friend because, when I wanted an explanation about any implement, tool, or whatever I saw just more or less laying around the place at that time, he was able to explain to me what it was, and then I'd go off and do my own research. So I got the bright idea to start a museum when I moved back to Gonzales and realized that I was in the heart of sugarcane plantation country. And for lack of having anything else to do coming out of Southern California, I I purchased a Jeep and set out to explore the River Road, and decided to go on a plantation tour, and was just very disturbed by the fact that there was no mention of slavery back in 1990, no mention of slavery whatsoever. And I also noticed that even when I visited the French Quarters, going to festivals, jazz fests, or jazz clubs, visiting in French Quarters, at that time in the 90s, the only objects you saw for sale in the gift shops were books about Little Black Sambo, Mammy cookie jars, and the Uncle Ben kind of salt and pepper shakers. Those were the only types of objects that you even saw. And of course, there was always the praline lady,
sure,
Miss Sally's pralines for
right.
sale everywhere. But I could hardly believe that in the 20th century, that this was still Louisiana's only representation of African Americans um, in what I came to understand was a part of the tourism retail industry.
Yeah,
Even tickets sold to the plantations were being touted as one of Louisiana's biggest revenue streams for tourism. And so I think it was the mere fact that what motivated me to change the narrative or to be more included in the narrative was the fact that I was stuck in Ascension Parish because now I live there. My father, we owned a funeral home, and I started to read obituaries, which was the perfect place to learn about the history of Black people, was reading those obituaries. And so I found the connection between a few obituaries and a couple of plantations, and then I was off and running.
That's great. I listened to a podcast that you did recently, and talking about where you spoke with met Jerry Hobdy at the Lieutenant Governor's office, and the African proverb that she had on the wall behind her, and about the lion. Do you want to
Yes.
tell about that, or I can read it off to you?
Yes,
Or
yes. So the proverb, which still I use today and refer to as "Until the lion writes his own story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter."
Hmm,
And that was on Jerry's wall. I think I could almost see it over her right shoulder in her office. And I went to the lieutenant governor's office, and just looking for a sounding board. It's like, do you know that there's all of these plantation tours that you're promoting here in Louisiana, and there's no mention of slavery? And I met Melinda Schwagman, who was then lieutenant governor, and I met Jerry Hobdy, and I said, "Do you realize everywhere, all over the airport, everywhere I go, there's all of these plantation brochures, and there's no mention of slavery?" And I think it was Melinda Schwagman who said to me, "Yeah, Kathe, I know." She said, "Yeah, Kathe, I know. There is a problem with it." And as I started to say to her, there needs to be an African American museum, it was like, there needs to be one somewhere. Somebody else needs to do it, is basically what I was saying. The state needs to do it, somebody needs to do it. I definitely wasn't speaking to say that I was going to be the one to do it.
mhm.
But I think by the time I left out of their offices and reading that proverb over Jerry's shoulder, I decided that I would have to be the one to at least take the initiative to do it.
You had to be that voice, and thank you so much for being that voice and to starting that transition into understanding and to speaking up for that. I mean, it's such an important part that I I think that we should be. We've got so much time to make up for, of understanding of the impact of African American communities, of their skills, of their roles, of their greatness, and how that has made our culture what it is today. And I think that we again have so much more to learn from that. And so thank you for being that voice, for starting the research, for starting the museum, um, and just being there to focus us on how these places didn't magically just appear, that they were built by the hands of enslaved individuals, that it's not just about glorifying the architecture and all the pretty gardens, but it's actually that this was an agricultural system that was the foundation for Louisiana and where we are today. But not ignoring that history. One thing that I've gotten to know Jane Body at Evergreen very well over the
Mhm,
past
mhm,
8 years, and
mhm,
just all the amount of research that they do there and understanding and the whole the timeline of the family members and their connections and stuff. There is that, on census records, people weren't marked down as enslaved or slaves or enslaved. They
mhm,
were carpenters, they were brick masons, they were, their that was their vocation, and so enslavement is a condition they were in, but their worth and their skills and their identity was in their being, and so I think that's there's so many other places we constantly are in that period, and I think that being corrected, being called out, where we see either ourselves or other places that are interpreting it one way, the way that we've been told for many years. It's time to start re-examining all that and making a change. And I think that's where we're just starting right now. But thank you for leading us down that path.
Well, I would say that the one of the biggest challenges for me, what I realized very soon with all of my enthusiasm about teaching about Black history, um, and from a local perspective, because I think that people would be more interested, children, I don't think it anymore, I know it, children would be more interested in in history in general if they were taught history from a local perspective first. I tell people all the time, the first place for someone to learn about Black history is at home. You know, you don't need to wait for the school or a teacher or anyone else to teach you, particularly in this day and age. There are so many books. There's so much. Well, we have to be careful with some of the stuff that's on the internet.
Sure.
But one of the things that we're going to be doing with young people here at the Amistad is teaching them how to use primary source documents. This is where the truth lies. I mean, the one of the most difficult things for me, I'll get back to that, to get back to the research part of it in a minute, was talking to people about slavery and not having people feel feel blamed or shamed.
Hmm.
So here I had people in my own community who were in denial that slavery ever happened to their relatives or their ancestors. Everybody in South Louisiana wanted to be the descendant of a free person of color. Oh no, my ancestors weren't slaves. They were free people. Yes, that may have been true for some of the people in your family, but it was astonishing how many African Americans wanted to identify with that first because they were ashamed to say that someone in the family had been enslaved. And then on the other side was, how do I interpret this history through artifacts, through art, and through the narratives that I will write for the volunteers here so that people don't feel blamed. I cannot blame you today for something that your great 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 grandfather did, no more than you could blame me today for something that my great 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 grandfather did.
Yeah.
It's about making people understand that we're supposed to learn from history, learn from the past. Hopefully, it will help us be better human beings today and in the future. So it's not about how they treated each other so much in the past. Yes, let's learn from that. But it's about, how do I treat you now? How do I respect you now as a human being? And how do we, together from what we've learned about the past, work so that there will never be a system of enslavement, no matter whether it's Black or white, whether it's children, whether it's for sexual exploitation purposes. We know that it was wrong and that we should all be trying to stand on the side of righteousness.
Absolutely. That kind of reminds me of one of the another project of yours. It's kind of one of the goals of Julius Rosenwald when he made the challenge grants for Rosenwald schools, was to get the Black community and the white community working together, because he would provide typically about a third of the um, funding for the
Mhm,
schools, for the Rosenwald
mhm,
schools from about 16 to 1932. He had put up about a third. The Black community would put up about a third, and the white community about a third in general, in order to come together and make these schools happen. Because it was the brainchild of Booker T. Washington, who saw that school boards in the South were not providing adequate facilities for Black students to
mhm,
learn. And
mhm,
you've had for the past nearly 3 decades been working to save the community agricultural school there and move it to Donaldsonville, and Do you want to tell us a little more about that story? It's amazing. And
Yeah. Okay. So I get my master's degree in museum studies from Southern University in New Orleans, and by then I'm now 10 years, 10 years or so, um, having studied slavery in Louisiana with my mentor and good friend, Dr. Gwendolyn Midlow Hall and Dr. Ibrahima Seck, who I met back in 94, right after her book was written, Africans in Colonial Louisiana. And then I start to look at the landscape along the River Road, and you started to wonder, thanks to Jane Bodie at Evergreen, and consulting with her, us consulting with each other over the years, there were so few slave cabins or quarter houses that remained. And then I started to think about, what are the other buildings that are related to our history along this river that are not cabins? You know, what are the other buildings that could help tell the story of how what Black people say and sing sometimes in old gospel songs, how we got over? How did we survive all of it? And it came to me, schoolhouses. Where's schoolhouses? Oh, I'd always heard about one-room schoolhouses. What does a one-room schoolhouse look like? Why weren't there any one-room schoolhouses at the Rural Life Museum? And when I came across a one-room schoolhouse, even in other states, there were one-room schoolhouses where white children went to school, Jewish children, some other ethnic group. Even in the Appalachians, I think I was traveling one time and went on a tour of a one-room schoolhouse. So I was always talking about these schoolhouses, and one of my board members at the time was on the St. James Parish School Board. She said, "Oh, Kathe, we have this big schoolhouse." She didn't even know how many rooms it was. "We have this big wooden schoolhouse." And she said, "We're getting ready to tear it down, or we're going to donate it to somebody because we need to have the building moved." And so I said, "Well, where's the building?" So she told me, and I went over to the little community right outside of Convent. They call it Union down one lane. Then it's called the Community of Central down another lane. But we know it all as being more or less Convent, Louisiana. And so I went down there. The community is also known as Romeville. It was the Romeville School. So I went down and I met Miss Francois, who lived in the yard at the front area of the school. And I started just asking her questions. "What's that building?" And so she started to tell me it was called the Central Agricultural School. And so I'm going, "What's an agricultural?" I'm going in my mind, "What's an agricultural school? What's this agricultural school?" And so she said, "Oh, you want to see the building? I'm going to call my husband. He'll get the janitor to open it up so you can look at it." So at that time, it was also Head Start being used as, I think they had just shut it down from being Head Start in the 1970s. So she and her husband pulled together a couple of people from the community who met me, and we went in the building. Then they started to tell me stories. It's like, yes, the principal's name was Mr. Landry. It was a four-room schoolhouse. Started to explain to me. I said, "Well, what grades was it?" And they started to explain to me that it was like first through eighth grade, because you would get a diploma in the eighth grade. Back then, it was equivalent to a 12th grade education, because she said every student who graduated from that school, and no one failed. There was no such thing as failure. Every student that graduated from that school could read and write. And she said there were so many of them that went on to become teachers. So they ended up going to, I guess back in the 30s, if you could read and write and pass on what they called like a normal education diploma, you could go to Southern University, or you could go to Grambling University, some of the first HBCUs, and certainly you could go and become a teacher because they were looking for teachers. So here I hear this story about a building. Not once did she ever mention anything about Rosenwald. Not once did I even know anything about Rosenwald. I was just excited that it was a wooden schoolhouse. So then I can't remember where. I called. She was at the Donna Fricker.
Yeah.
Called Donna Fricker, and I think it might have been Jerry Hobbity who told me to call Donna Fricker. And I said, Donna, I found this old school building and I need money because I want to make it a part of our museum. So she was excited. She came and she immediately said, Kathe, this is a Rosenwald. And I said, what's a Rosenwald? And then together she started to tell me all about the National Trust and Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald. And then for the next now 27 years of my life, I've studied both of those men and learned about the 5,300 schools that they built in 15 Southern states to educate Black children in the rural South. And I will tell you, through my own family knowledge, and through the numbers of people that I've talked to, there's probably hardly any Black family in America who has roots from the South that did not have at least one family member go to school in one of those buildings funded, as you said, through America's first successful public-private partnership formed by Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald.
Yeah, it's amazing, and the fact that even at the that Romeville school, that the Black community, the story there was they raised the funds, turned it over to the school board, and that it was used for a white school, and they demanded that the school that they raised funds for be constructed. And so the fact that they were in the 1920s, you know, sticking up for them
Yes, yeah,
is another great part of the story as well. So
yeah,
uh,
because our building was built. They built the Rosenwald and Booker T through that Rosenwald Fund and that connection with the Black community, willing school boards or members of the white community, and the Rosenwald Fund. Um, it's amazing that this partnership included the Black community. And when the Black community there in 1930 found out that the school board had taken the money from the Rosenwald Fund sent from Chicago, taken the money that was intended for their school and built white schools, they raised the money and built the school anyway.
wow,
So that speaks to, remember how I said, how do we tell the story of how we got over?
yeah,
How do we survive? Parents knew then, coming out of slavery, that education was the key. And even in my generation, generation of parents, aunts, and uncles who received their education in those schools, I grew up with a generation of knowing that education was going to be the key to my success also. The question that I ask to the hundreds of people who pass through that building now, and the question that I hope that the tour guides and the board of directors and the executive director of the museum up there now will ask parents and children is if they realize that education is still the key to our success. Ignorance will do us in, and we must teach our children not only to be able to read and write, but they need to be able to comprehend what they read. And they also need to understand the importance of doing research by using primary source documents. And I'm afraid to say that that is not going to come from the internet.
No, it's not. It's too much of a an opportunity for construing or telling half of the story. And I think that when
Manipulation,
yeah, yeah,
exploitation,
absolutely.
all of
I,
all
I
of
w-
those things.
yeah, I will say also just appreciation for what the digitalization of collections has done with expanding our ability to do research. So I guess it's a double-edged sword with the internet of being able to, from online newspapers to just knowing that there are resources in an archive that haven't even been digitized yet, but knowing that they're in that location in some obscure, repository. Has definitely fostered our ability to do the research over the past 10 to 15 years. But as you said, the primary source um, documents are key.
Are key. I mean, when I started the museum, hardly a founder of any museum, hardly a historian or a curator of any museum anywhere in the world cannot have a successful um, operation or institution without visiting an archives.
Or
Uh,
reputation.
this is where the truth lies, and you must know how to use these places as resources. And yes, digitization is important, but in the age of AI, I don't know.
That's
I
yes,
don't
agreed.
we don't know where it's going to go. It's a double-edged sword, but there's nothing like looking down at a table and being able to read a letter written on paper by Martin Luther King in his own handwriting, or to read a letter as I did a couple of weeks ago, an original letter written by Fannie Lou Hamer,
Wow.
a 2-page letter. It was a group of high school students in here at the Amistad, and my staff in the reading room put out some civil rights documents for them to look at, original documents. And they were able to, I passed by this one table and just glanced down on my way back to my office. And it was original letter written by Fannie Lou Hamer. And so, I said, this is a good place for me to be.
It's powerful, exactly. I mean, another of
Yeah.
those places you mentioned about coming over was the True Friends Hall that's there in Donaldsonville as well, and what
Yes.
those halls meant to from Masonic halls to other group, gathering places that were safe places for African American communities to come together and to
Hmm. Hmm.
foster learning and stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit? And you said True Friends Hall is on its way as well.
Yeah. So, before the age of television, before the age of insurance companies, before the age of the Red Cross, um, these benevolent society halls provided a safe place for people to go for entertainment, to do fundraising for political purposes or for insurance purposes. Um, you would pay a quarter a month to 50 cents a month to $1 a month to the society. So think of it as a club, a private club. So your parents would pay this 25 cents, 50 cents, or whatever per family member to the club, the society. If anyone in your family was sick, you'd get your mom usually was the matriarch in the family who would hold the little book, the little book that would keep the records for your payments. And then she would take that book and go to the doctor to show that she was paid up. And the doctor would render any services, whether it was pulling a tooth, whether it was stitching up a cut, whatever it was. Even some of the midwives in the area would get their payments from the benevolent societies. Pharmacists would get payments from medicine from the benevolent society. So it was really like HMO, like an HMO, an HMO form of insurance. You were part of a group. You had your group number, that was the name of the society, and the group paid the bill.
Wow.
Um, so these places existed after emancipation because white insurance companies would not insure blacks. So we were smart enough to create our own little insurance entities, and then they would have dances and parties, and some of them would almost be like a juke joint. Um, Jazz music evolved in many of these benevolent society halls, like the True Friends Benevolent Society Hall that is in Donaldsonville, that was built in 1897. And we own the building. When I say we, I mean we, the public. You own it also because it's a part of the 501c3, the River Road African American Museum. So it's a nonprofit entity. And we have been raising money, and the state is also looking to give us some capital outlay funding. And we're going to turn that old Benevolent Society Hall, where the Zulu Carnival Club toasted on the balcony in 1929, and where Fats Domino played on the stage, and where Plas Johnson, who is the famous saxophonist who plays the Pink Panther song in the Henry Mancini movie, where he played his first gig, it will become the Rural Roots of Music Hall of Fame and Music Academy. So it will be a music school for children and teenagers to learn about the history of jazz and to learn how to play music on real instruments again.
Wow. That is amazing. Great work. Do you, I guess, and we're getting close to time here. Do you have any advice for folks who are young people who are interested in getting into preservation, into museology, into telling those stories and being part of this, part of these voices that that are moving forward?
My word for today for young people who think they might be interested in history or museums is my word for today is authentic. Do we in society today know what that word means? Think about authentic. What does authentic mean to you as you look around your house, as you walk around your neighborhood, as you walk around your city, as you look at the way people dress, if you look at traditions, what we call traditions, will we be able to discern the fake from the authentic?
Great
Which would
advice.
be better, the fake or the authentic? What do we learn from authenticity? And there's a lot to be learned in the realm of authenticity.
That's right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other closing thoughts or remarks or advice or things that we didn't talk about that you'd like to?
I would say to anyone who has not visited the River Road African American Museum, if you want to see the Rosenwald School and also see the True Friends Hall before the renovation, you are welcome to go to the open house and join the genealogy workshop on October 21st, Saturday, and you can go to the website or to the Facebook page of the River Road African American Museum. It'll be all day from 10 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon in Donaldsonville. For those of you who want to take a look at this very, very interesting, massive collection of history at the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University. Go to amistadresearchcenter.org and then type in something into the finding aids. And you can then make an appointment to come and look at the original documents. Original documents, it's really something to experience and see. And if you're a historian, I will say that this is a historian's playground.
Well, Kathe Hambrick, thank you so much for your time, for your sharing your experiences. One thing we didn't mention, the fact that also a passion of yours has been burial grounds of the African Americans throughout the years, and it's such an important. There are almost also archives and repositories of information, and I know it's also been a passion of yours.
Yes, I will be turning over my personal archives from my slave cemetery research and African burial grounds research from the river parishes. I believe I have now close to 8 archaeological investigative data reports from the Army Corps of Engineers and private environmental groups. And some of these documents or these data books have names of enslaved people, maps, locations, photos of artifacts that were found. And so I will be turning over my own personal research library on slave cemeteries to the Amistad very soon. And look for some big announcements about some work coming up for the reinterment of a man who's been above ground now for over 30 years.
Wow.
And his bones, he was formerly enslaved, and his bones have been sitting on a shelf. And we will be working to reinter him with some dignity very, very soon in 2024.
Great work. So, Kathe Hambrick, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.